episode of the Ismailis in Conversation series, I am speaking with Sultan Allana. He is a director of the Aga Khan Fund for Economic Development, AKFED, and has oversight of the financial services arm of AKFED. Thank you for joining us. So let's start by helping our viewers understand a little bit more about your role or various roles that you play. You are a director of the Aga Khan Fund for Economic Development, or AKFED. What is AKFED actually, and how is it related to the vision and mission of AKDN?
AKFED is the for-profit arm of the AKDN. So if you look at the AKDN, it basically has two distinct parts to it. One is the not-for-profit, where you've got the hospitals, you've got the schools, the Rural Support Program, the Aga Khan Foundation, Habitat, and other not-for-profit activities that the AKDN undertakes around the world. And on this side, you have the for-profit organization, which is the Aga Khan Fund for Economic Development, which operates projects, development and commercial projects in different parts of the world. And the for-profit side, if you look at it, it is, I would say it is an ecosystem where you've got a balance between what Ismaili terms as deen and dunya. So if you look at it this way, it is a balancing factor. And while AKFED works towards sustainable formations of companies, capital, on this side of the equation, we have the agencies that do work for humanitarian purposes.
Within AKFED, you have oversight of the banking and insurance companies, which date back to the time of Maulana Sultan Muhammad Shah. Please tell us some of that history.
It's a very interesting history, and if you go back in time, and people often ask me this question, and what we've been able to track back, the movement started with the formation of cooperative societies way back somewhere in the 1920s, when Imam Sultan Muhammad Shah encouraged the Jamaati members at that time to form cooperative societies where the Jamaati members could put their savings and put these savings to good use, such as creation of housing colonies or for the purposes of small loans for business purposes. Now, mind you, in 1920, 1930, the world was a very different place. And the concept of banks was not really there in many of the emerging markets, so to speak. It was a colonized world at that time. And therefore, we see early signs of cooperative societies coming up. And we've gone back. Data suggests that we have got cooperative societies as early as 1920, 1930. And then comes in a time when the Golden Jubilee happens, and Imam Sultan Muhammad Shah decided to put the proceeds that were realized out of the Jubilee into creating an institutional framework. And that gave birth to the first financial institution, I would say, which is Jubilee. And this was created in East Africa, and today this is Jubilee Insurance. So that was the first one that was formed. And at that time, Imam Sultan Muhammad Shah's vision was that Jubilee would help the Jamaati members at that time to further their businesses. Mind you, there was no concept at that time of easy access to banking or financial services. So this became a very solid platform for the Jamaati members in those days who had no access to other financial services to get the financial services from Jubilee. And that is where it starts from. And then, of course, subsequently in 1947, at the time of the second Jubilee, Imam Sultan Muhammad Shah again put the proceeds that were realized from Jubilee into an institutional form, which today is known as the Diamond Trust Bank. So the Jubilee funds from Imam Sultan Muhammad Shah's time, as well as from Shah Karim, Hazrat Imam's time, have been put to the use of formation of institutions for the betterment of the Jamaat. So that's where it all comes from. Then, of course, other institutions were added to it. But the genesis of the financial institution comes from the time of the Jubilees. And that's why you will see, for example, in East Africa, the institution itself is known as Jubilee, right? In Pakistan, again, the insurance companies that we have, which are the Life and General, are both branded as Jubilee. So this became a generic brand for us. It's a very special meaning for all of us, particularly those from the Jamaat, who see these contributions of the Imam coming into formation of institutions. Now, mind you, this was not the only place where the funds were put. The Imam also made contributions to the creation of many housing colonies. And if you look around the Jubilee time, whether you look at these in the context of India, Pakistan, East Africa, you will find many institutions, many housing colonies were created around that time, which go by the name. For example, in Karachi, you have the Platinum Housing Society, etc. Carry that name with them, either as Jubilee or one of the or Silver Jubilee Development Agency that we have in Pakistan, for example, which was formed at the time of Hazrat Imam's Silver Jubilee. So many of these institutions have centered around those themes, and the Jamaat has benefited in a very massive manner from these institutions over the years.
So apart from being a director of AKFED, you are also the chairman of HBL. This bank has a very interesting history. Could you elaborate on that?
Yes, this bank has a history which is very unique. This bank was created in the early 40s, and at the time when Pakistan came into formation in 1947, this was the first bank that was formed in Pakistan in 1947. And in the 70s, this bank was nationalized by the government of Pakistan. And the privatization process of this bank began somewhere around 2002, when the government first sought bids for its privatization. The bid for privatization was towards the end of 2003, when the actual privatization of this bank happened, and the Aga Khan Fund for Economic Development participated in that privatization process and acquired a majority stake. And therein it became an institution which is part of the AKDN. The control was transferred to us somewhere in February 2004. And at that time, Maulana Hazmam asked me to lead this institution in the capacity as the chairman of the board, which I very happily and readily accepted. And therein is the story.
Right. So you've told us a little bit about AKFED, a little bit about HBL. Tell us a little bit about your history, inside and outside of AKFED and HBL.
I came back to Pakistan after the completion of my studies in 1985, and by training I am an engineer. But when I came back to Pakistan in 1985, at that time, the market for engineers was not really there in Pakistan. And therefore, it was not out of choice, but I would say because there was nothing else available, I decided to join a bank at that time, and this was Citibank. And as I said, it was because there were very few prospects at that time for jobs in Pakistan, other than a few in the banking industry. And I was very fortunate to have gotten a job at Citibank. So I started my career as a banker and never looked back. And fast forward, went on to create a stock brokerage investment house in 1994, which subsequently was converted into a full-fledged commercial bank, which I ran until this assignment came my way, and I switched from my own running of my own institution bank to HBL and participating in, I would say, in endeavors which I had never anticipated, all exciting. And I've been fortunate enough to have gone through this process. Subsequently, I started within AKFED as the chairman of HBL, But subsequently, 2 years later, the entire financial sector, Imam asked me to lead it, which again, with great honor, I have been leading since then.
Lovely. So in this last 40 years that you've been in the banking industry and that has developed, what are some of the challenges you've faced?
Banking industry has gone through, I would say, drastic changes like the rest of the world. I remember in 1985 when I first came to Pakistan, the laptops were just coming into the market, right? And it was a big thing to have a laptop on your desk. So that's where I started my career from. And if you fast forward to where we are today, laptop and desktops are, desktops don't even exist anymore in the forms that they did. Technology, the evolution of technology and communication, I think has changed the way the world works. And it has also reshaped the entire financial industry. So we moved from the classical forms of banking and insurance as they existed when I started my career as a banker to where they are today, heavily driven by technology, communication channels widely used, artificial intelligence, which are deployed now across the board. So the way the banking industry has evolved in the global scenario, I think today, I would say there is no comparison to where it was when I started my banking career. So it's been a very interesting journey, but also a very challenging one because the world has changed at such a rapid pace and is continuing to change at such a rapid pace that just keeping, I would say, in line with the pace is a huge challenge. And the game is to be ahead of the game. And I think that poses major challenges, not just for us, but I would say for all financial institutions, and I would say for most industries around the world, because the way technology and communication is evolving was quite unanticipated, I would say. It was not anticipated in 1985. So it's a very different world.
So now that I see that the majority of the banks operated by AKDN are in Asia and Africa, in this rapidly changing global environment that you speak of, how do they keep up with the technological advances of today that are prevalent in today's society? How are these banks keeping up with it?
Right. I think technology evolution, as I mentioned, is a global phenomena. It's not just a phenomena for the emerging markets where we operate our financial institutions. But having said that, I would say that we, in many cases, have been ahead of the curve. And the reason we've been ahead of the curve is because in these emerging markets, we've been able to, I would say, jump barriers. For example, many of the emerging markets went into 4G and 5G, whereas you still see some of the developed countries which are still operating on the 3G and 4G environments. So in that sense, I would say the emerging markets have been able to take giant steps in terms of their advancement in technology. And with the manpower that's available, the youth, and I would say the youth bulge in most of the countries where we are, the talent pool exists. And therefore, we've been able to, I would say, in many cases, be ahead of the curve. Now, I'm not suggesting that we are ahead of the curve in all aspects, but I would say certainly today our banks are more advanced, if not as advanced, as any bank might be in its technological platform or its technological capability anywhere in the world.
In 2006, Hazrat Imam spoke about the role of financial institutions. He said,
"Another priority is to foster indigenous financial institutions, not only in commercial banking, but also in fields such as microcredit, lease finance, microinsurance, and other financial products. Flexibility must be a constant watchword in a world which is changing at an ever-accelerating pace.
Why do you think it's a priority for Maulana Hazrat Imam to foster indigenous financial institutions?
It's a very loaded question, and I think if I was to respond to this question, we're going to be here for a long time. But let me narrate a story to you. In one of my earlier presentations that I made to Maulana Hazrat Imam, and this was at the time when HPL was privatized around end 2004, if I recall correctly. I had the opportunity of making a presentation before Maulana Hazrat Imam with reference to HBL, because it was privatized and I had been appointed as a chairman, and I'd done the basic study of saying where the bank is, where is it that the bank is going to be in 5 years and 10 years. And so I put this presentation to Maulana Hazrat Imam. I still remember I had a 2-hour slot for that presentation. And I also recall that I spoke almost for an hour and a half non-stop with slides and with all sorts of, I would say, gizmos on it, right? And at the end of my presentation, Hazrat Imam complimented me on the presentation, and he then said to me, he said, "Sultan, throughout the presentation, you have never once talked about the people. You've never talked about the people who work for you. You've never talked about the people who are going to be your customers. You have never talked about the people of Pakistan." And then he said something very interesting. He said, "It is not just about making money. It is about building institutions. Build a fine institution." And I left that room completely changed, because I had come from a commercial world where bottom line is what mattered. Here I was now confronted with a challenge where the bottom line was not the end objective. The objective was to build institutions. What did he mean by building institutions? I think one of the key elements that Hazrat Imam has emphasized, has always emphasized as far as whenever I've had interactions with Maulana Hazrat Imam on this subject matter, is financial inclusion. And financial inclusion at all tiers. As you know, the banking penetration in the emerging markets has been quite low, traditionally, historically. And therefore, financial inclusion is a life-changing goal, right? And this is something that Hazrat Imam has been emphasizing, which then gave rise to the creation of microbanks, because there was a clear realization that for us to be able to address the lower end spectrum of the earning bracket, we would need financial institutions which were geared to do that kind or delivery work, which the commercial banks couldn't. And that gave rise to, for example, the microfinance bank network that we have today. And therefore, the whole notion of financial inclusion becomes our centerpiece. And our institutional formations, wherever you see us, whether you see us in Pakistan, whether you see us in East Africa context or Central Asian context or in the Indian context, is built on the premises of moving towards providing financial inclusion and therefore creating product offerings for every tier of the society. Now, we still have a long way to go, so I'm not suggesting that we're there, but this is something that we aspire to, and this is the direction that we are taking at this point in time. So I guess the whole concept of development is intertwined, because with financial inclusion, you're able to offer products and services which ultimately lead towards creation of employment and development. So I would say these are all intertwined subject matters. And therefore, for us, this remains a top priority.
We discussed earlier that some of the institutions have been around since about 1920s, 1930s. We've seen significant growth over the past 7 decades during the imamat of Maulana Hazrat Imam. What has been his involvement in this work?
Maulana Hazrat Imam, during his term as the Imam, I think I would say that he has created a very strong institutional framework. So while we had institutions during Imam Sultan Umar's time, what Hazrat Imam has done is to strengthen the institutional basis across the entire spectrum, whether it is on the AKFED side, on the for-profit side, or it is on the not-for-profit side. And I think this is a form that ensures sustainability. So I would say that Hazrat Imam's emphasis has been on creating institutional structures which are sustainable, which have the ability to grow with the passage of time, and which have the ability to also change with the passage of time, because that's critical. As I said, technological changes in the communication world are prompting us on both sides of the spectrum to change. And this change is no longer like in the past, we would present a 5-year plan and say, this is the 5-year plan, and at the end of 5 years, you'd be asked, how have you performed during the 5 years? Today, you make a plan in the morning, by evening, that plan has to be changed because something has happened somewhere in the world which causes you to rethink the whole plan. And therefore, this dynamism can only come through when you have strong institutional structures which are capable of providing response. And I think that is something that Hazrat Imam has built in a manner where our institutions today, alhamdulillah, across the spectrum, I would say, are strong and are able to respond to the changing needs of the people and, of course, the changing needs of our Jamaat.
So now when we discuss HBL and other banks, insurance companies, which all fall under the AKFED umbrella, they all contribute to the national development of the countries in which they operate. Can you just elaborate on that a little bit?
Certainly. If you look at the financial institutions that are under the purview of AKFED, which are the banks and the insurance companies, we service over 50 million customers in the span that we operate in. That's a very large number. We employ, I would say, over 50,000 people, men and women, provide equal opportunities for both in all our institutions around the world. So in that sense, when you look at our contribution to these emerging markets, it's massive, right? I mean, 50 million people is a large number. And this is an evolving number. So if you see our growth since the time that we've embraced the digital world, it is over 15-20%. And therefore, if you were to fast forward from where we are today, I would say in the next 5 years, you do the math, and we are going to be servicing over 75 million customers. That's a large number of customers to be able to service. So I think the financial services that we provide across all tiers of the society, which includes the segments which were unbanked, is very significant. And that's where our main focus and role is. And that's where it will remain. So we're not focusing on only breaking people from other banks to bring businesses to us. We're actually creating business through financial inclusion. And that for us is the exciting proposition, because other banks are not doing that. That is something where I would say we're very proud to operate in that space. And I think we've got an edge in that space because we've been at this now for a while. And our structures, our technology is geared for that segment. You can take agriculture as an example. Today, in a country like Pakistan, for example, where there are over 30 banks and there are government-owned institutions that focus on agriculture, HBL's share in the agriculture market is almost 30%. So you can imagine the kind of services we are providing in the agro field. And that, as you know, is 60% of Pakistan's economy is agro. That's the backbone of the economy. So in that sense, it's an area where others don't focus on, but we focus on. And that is going to be our emphasis going forward.
Right. So speaking of the unbanked that you were speaking of, we hear a lot about microfinance banks and the products and services that it provides. Can you elaborate a little bit about what microfinance is and how does it really help people?
Right. Well, microfinance banks focus on people whose income levels are on the lower side of the scale and who do not necessarily qualify, I would say, for a commercial banking product or solutions. So these banks operate not just in the rural economies, but also in the urban settings. However, their entire approach to products, solutions, and monitoring is very different to commercial banks. I would say there's a greater touch and feel when it comes to microfinance banks, because you have relationship managers who will have a near daily interaction with the micro borrowers, right? So it's a very different kind of a product offering. I mean, mind you, a fruit vendor, for example, on a roadside does not have a balance sheet. He does not have an income statement. So how do you finance that? A woman who makes food at home and supplies tiffins, she doesn't have a balance sheet or an income statement or any security that she can offer. How do you examine her business model? So it requires specialized skills of relationship managers who are able to sit with them, understand their business models, give them advice on how their business models can be improved, and then offer them services and solutions, and then be able to monitor them. And we have many success stories, and these are amazing success stories. Some are very emotional because, you know, when you see these people on the screen and you realize the kind of impact that these institutions have made, they've changed their lives. I mean, these people had no hope. Today they have hope. And again, this is a word Hazmam uses often of giving hope. I think it's a very powerful word, hope. And he has used this on many occasions when we talk of the unbanked or we talk of the poor segments of our society, is giving them hope. And I think that really makes a huge difference. So I get very emotional when I talk about this because, again, I've been very fortunate that Hazmam gave me the opportunity to create the first microfinance bank, which happened in Pakistan, and then subsequently this model was replicated in many of the markets. Mind you, I came from the commercial world. So for me, this was a completely, I would say, it was a paradigm shift in thought process. But the realization that the word hope was so powerful, I did not have that when I was in the commercial world to when I came to this side, that it means a lot. It means a lot because it can change lives of people, and it is all about people. AKDN is all about people. It's about giving hope to people. It's about changing lives. And that's where I would say AKDN holistically comes together, whether it is health, whether it is education, whether it is housing, whether it is habitat, whether it is banking, whether it is our power generation projects, whether it is our tourism projects. If you look at all of them in a holistic manner, they're all projects that contribute towards making a difference in the lives of people. And that's what matters. And that's what AKDN is all about.
That's great. That's lovely to hear. So now that we've kind of shifted the conversation a little bit, on a more personal note, you've had many opportunities to work closely with Hazrat Imam over your long career. We're going to ask that you share a few stories.
Well, firstly, I would say I've had a very unique journey in the AKDN. For me, being an Ismaili, of course, he's my Imam. But more, I would say, from my personal point of view, I would say that for me, he has been a teacher, a guide, and in our terminology, we say Ustad, which encompasses everything, right? And for me, I've been fortunate to be able to have had him as an Ustad, where he has taught me and where I've learned from him aspects of life, for example, which in my case were missing. As an example, I use the word hope. I came from a commercial world. For me to have this realization was a learning experience. For me to realize that there was more to life than just making money was important. For me to realize that we could actually change the lives of people was important. And I think in that sense, I would say that, and that has happened not just with me, but I would say with all the people who have worked with Imam, is that he has been a coach and a guide in almost all aspects. And in terms of his, I would say, his positioning as the head of AKFED, it has been a remarkable experience because his understanding of the markets where we operate, his understanding of the businesses in these markets, his understanding of the behavior of people in these markets has been for us absolutely life lessons, I would say, because that kind of deep understanding I have not seen anyone else with. So him as a head of the Aga Khan Fund for Economic Development, I would say, has been absolutely for us a life experience. And I would say that I consider myself very fortunate. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. Is there anything you would like to share with the youth of today?
Yes, I would. Well, one of the important messages that I want to leave on the table today is that the world is changing. And it's changing at a pace which was never anticipated. And I think the change in the future is going to be extraordinary. And I think there are aspects to life that we must understand and we must examine. There are many trades and there are many professions which will disappear in the coming years, right? If you have come across this artificial intelligence tool, ChatGPT, and I think there are many other similar tools that are emerging, you will realize from there that many professions will disappear. Now, I'm not suggesting you should not become a lawyer. I am not suggesting you should not become an accountant. But I think you should walk into these professions knowing and fully realizing that in the next 5 to 7 years, these professions either will be extremely specialized or will disappear because the tools that are coming in this space, in the artificial intelligence space, are going to change the way professions work. So that's the first part. And therefore, I think we need to prepare ourselves from going into professions that in the past worked, but in today's time are considered stereotypes, and they will disappear. The second aspect is the climate change. Here, I think the realization, not just in the Jamaat, but I think on a global scale, is, in my view, not really there. This change, climate change agenda, climate change is going to alter the way the world exists today. We will see migration because many of the areas around the world today where people live will become unlivable. Many of the crop producing countries will not be able to produce the crops the way they have been producing crops. Water shortages will occur. And therefore, I think professions which today may not be attractive will become extremely attractive in the future. As an example, agriculture. And I'm not talking about conventional and classical agriculture, as Hazma once put it, scientific agriculture, which is hydroponics, drip irrigation, vertical farming. These are going to become the fields of the future. And today, when you see in the world, there are very few people who specialize in these areas. And I think that this is going to be an area that's going to open up. And if our youth were to focus in these areas, I think that they will excel. Then, of course, the migration that's going to occur, we have to see where these migrations will occur and what kinds of professions these migratory trends will bring forward. Health services, as an example, right? We have the manpower, we have the youth, health-related fields, not necessarily becoming a full-fledged doctor, but I would say professions such as nursing or healthcare workers or, for example, technologists will open up. And we are seeing them open up today in the West. So I think these are areas which are the areas for the future. And for the youth, it's important to understand what the future will look like and for them to be able to shape their lives today for tomorrow. It's very important. We need to move away from the stereotype. I remember when I was growing up, you either became a doctor or an engineer or an accountant or an architect, and your life stopped at that level. If you were anything else, it was like, oh my God. But today, these professions, in my view, are not the only professions of the future. I mean, as I said, the future lies elsewhere. And I think it's important that our youth understand that if they want to achieve success in their endeavors in the future, then they must reposition themselves today. There's a shortage of agriculturists, scientific agriculture definitely. So there are shortages in the world today, and these shortages will only increase. Water treatment, water solutions. Today, the world is short on water. Water supply, water treatment. I mean, these are areas of the future. So I would encourage the youth to look at these professions as their professions for the future.
Lovely. So Sultan, we're seeing an increase in disparity in all parts of the world, but particularly in emerging markets, such as ours. What are your thoughts on that? And what response can be considered in reducing this gap?
This is a very serious concern. And particularly for the emerging markets, we are seeing, and you rightly said, that the gap between the have and the have-nots is widening. This is a problem not just for our Jamaat, but I would say it is across the countries, particularly emerging markets. I think one area that we are focusing on is training. Again, on the not-for-profit side, as you're well aware, our institutions are constantly upgrading training skills wherever they can through the councils or through EPBs in these markets. On the AKFED side, again, in all our institutions, financial institutions, we have a strong emphasis on training and development. It is a budget line item that we encourage people not to have debates on. In other words, we encourage that these items be approved simply because we believe that these are important aspects of institutional build-up. So training and development is an area where we take in fresh recruits, graduates, and in some cases in AKFED, also non-graduates. Give them the training skills, gender equality. For example, if you look at HBL, at the time of privatization, the percentage of women in HBL was less than 3%. Today, alhamdulillah, we are above 20%. And for us, this is still too low. We need to get up there. And therefore, what we do as part of our mandate is to ensure that we give training and development across all our financial institution setups, including our tourism portfolio, for example, where training is imparted. And the purpose of this is so that we can bridge the gap between the have and the have-nots. This is an area where we focus on. The second is, for example, in the product and solutions that we offer, whether it is microbanking, whether it is microinsurance. For example, when you look at the microinsurance portfolio, people who are of low income standing face huge challenges when they're sick or they have to be hospitalized. We offer tailor-made micro solutions for them where they don't have to sell their homes to treat themselves or to treat family members. And that again has been a game changer. We're today one of the largest micro insurers, for example, in Pakistan. Right? And again, micro insurance it is a life-changing product. It's a life-changing product where it's not only hospitalization solutions are provided, but also educational solutions are provided. So those who aspire for their children to go to universities and colleges can start saving at a very early age for them to be able to send their children to colleges when they come of age, which in a generational cycle will help them bridge the gap. So it's a generational problem. Bridging a gap cannot be done in a year or 2 or 3 or 4, but it's a generational cycle, as Hazman puts it. And I think for us to be able to come up with products and solutions for people to bridge that generational gap is important. And again, here I would say we're not there. We have a long way to go. We have much more to do. And we will have to do much more to get ahead of the game. But it's a very important element. And I think you've highlighted a huge, I would say, gap that exists, and it's increasing around the world, and especially in the emerging markets.
So looking at the demographics of Pakistan, where predominantly we have a large sector of youth here, how important is human capital for the future of the country?
If the human capital is harnessed and utilized in a proper manner, it can be a huge asset, not just for Pakistan, but for any country in the world. On the other hand, if not, it can prove to be a liability. So I think countries which have large youth bulges or youth population, there's a major opportunity for them to become economies of relevance. However, these countries will have to ensure that the youth are provided with the proper skills, tools, education, and orientation for them to become assets and not liabilities. This again is a huge challenge. As far as the AKDN is concerned, again, there is a huge focus in this area. As you know, many of our Jamaati institutions on this side of the spectrum work with the youth in order to ensure that the youth go through the training, education, have the skill sets to be able to get into job markets or to be able to provide sustainable living for their households. So I think it's an area which is of worry and concern. And in the context of Pakistan, because you specifically asked about Pakistan, I think the youth bulge that we have here is, in the global context, it can be a game changer for the country if this is harnessed and oriented in the right way.
Brilliant. So Sultan, we'd like to thank you for your time.
Pleasure.
And to our audience, thank you very much for joining us with Sultan Allana in conversation.
Thank you.